What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to our actually live Lumix Live. It has been 3 weeks since we've done a live stream last, and I have to say I am actually super excited to be back in the live format, talking to all of you, answering your questions, hopefully getting to answer as many questions as we can today, and talking about the really cool firmware release that was just made public while I was away. So we've got a lot to talk about today. I also have a bunch of questions that have been put in the previous video comments, so we can chat about those. We're going to talk a little bit about this past 2 weeks while I was on vacation using the S5iix as my general travel camera. So we're going to talk about the kit that I used, what advantages, what benefits it gave me. And then, yeah, just kind of keep this a bit of a more chill, kind of open conversation. I do have my S5 Mark II as well as an S5 Mark IIX set up here. So we can go through the menus. We're going to talk about firmware first, go over where you can get it, what the improvements are, where you can find them in the menus. And then, yeah, we'll jump into the Q&A and just kind of the general AMA part of this stream as well. So, if this is your first time joining the streams, welcome. These are weekly broadcasts that we do, or try to do weekly broadcasts, where it's all about you, the creators out there. So the questions you have, the comments you want to make to us, the recommendations and suggestions that you have for the products, either the existing products or what you want to see in the future, this is the place where you get to chat with us and get to actually just, you know, have responses from the company that's making the equipment. Before we jump too far into this, I want to remind you that if you do have a question during the stream, as you can see many are doing so far, just tag at Lumix USA or Lumix Cameras. It'll come up the same way. Just so I can see them in the chat. It helps me filter through so we can get into all of that info. And since this is a general AMA stream, there's not really any limit to what you ask. I'll try my best to answer as many questions as I can, and I'll try to get you as many answers as I can. Some stuff I can't answer, either because I don't know or I'm just not able to answer at this time. But yeah, we'll try to go through as much as we can today. I want to remind everybody here in the US about Lumix Pro services. We have the Red and the Platinum tier available. Red tier is free if you've bought a Lumix camera, if you've picked up an S5 Mark II or a Mark IIX. Make sure to go take a look at Lumix Pro services. The Red tier is free. It's included with your purchase. There is the higher level availability as well for Platinum. If you follow the link, you can take a look at the differences between the two programs, but at a really high level, Platinum gets you 2-day repairs with next day shipping both ways, 20% off out of warranty repairs if you happen to break something that's out of a warranted service. You get sensor cleanings, annual EVF cleanings, all that kind of fun stuff. But you also get an exclusive hotline, so if you would prefer to speak to somebody, you're able to actually call in, try to get some help that way. If that service team isn't available to get you an answer right away, they check with a lot of us, myself, Matt Fraser, some of the others, our engineering team, to try to get you an answer as fast as we can. So yeah, encourage you to take a look at those if you're here in the US. Abroad, we have links down in the description for LPS in different regions. So I encourage you to take a look at all of that. And yeah, so let's take a look really quick at some of the questions that came through. We're going to jump right back up to the top. I see a bunch of questions coming in from Andreas. I think I'm pronouncing that right. I will get to those in a little bit. Let's see here. How do you recommend rigging the BS1H to shoot in RAW? I'm going to hold that one a little bit, Chris, because I do actually want to talk about that. I have some experience shooting with the box cameras in RAW, so I have a couple of recommendations, but it's a little more in-depth. Let's see here. John says, new to the S5 Mark II for 1 week, never used live composite. Can you do a general run-through and or tips? It's exactly one of the things I'm going to do today, so we're going to talk about that. I forgot to turn my phone on silent. Let's see here. Chris says, why get the S5iix over the S5 II? It's just the extra purchase code? Nope, there is actually a lot more involved with it than that, and we'll talk about that with the firmware. On the S5 Mark IIX, half pressing the shutter changes exposure of the display, makes shutter and f-stop indicator blink red. Does this mean to... is this meant to advise more or less exposure? Can it be turned off? Yeah, we'll talk about that when I jump to the camera. Loving my new S5 Mark IIX. Use it to shoot a documentary in Indonesia recently. Wondering about the banding issues in vlog present on any of these cameras versus the previous. Anything upcoming? I will talk about that a little bit. I'm not the most kind of like the person to talk to about the image quality side. However, I can tell you in my experiences, I have never run into the banding. But I know that there are some that have very different ways of editing and have caused some things, but you can do that in anything. But yeah, I'll try to touch on that a little bit. What is the major difference between the S5 Mark II and the S5iix? We're going to talk about that. The H.264 HEVC codec looks great on the GH6. Question: if I choose standard profile and adjust noise reduction to -5, I assume this setting is for JPEG only, not RAW photos. Yep. Zizo, wondering if the 24-70 is getting IS or if it's staying like that. Oh, okay. I think I follow you there. And then Kudo, do you think we will ever be able to use high frame rates over SSD in the future, or is that hardware limitation that's on the GH6? Cool. All right. So let's run through some of this stuff and talk about the firmware, because a lot of the questions that I see here are explaining the differences between the cameras, why would you pick one over the other, and I think the firmware update can help, mitigate some of those questions for you. So, to start with, let's take a look at the firmware updates. So, there were 2 firmware updates, technically there's 3 total, but there are 2 firmware updates that have been made available as of a few days ago. One is for the S5 Mark II, and then the other is for the S5 Mark IIX. Now, let's start with the X. So that's what I've got on the left side here. So the S5 Mark IIX goes to version 1.1. And what this firmware brings is general system improvements. So that's things like image quality, compatibility with SD cards, as well as the operational stability. Now, what do those things mean? In general, when you see firmware updates like this, it's usually updates that are for various different cases that have been reported back through to our team that are within the time frame that we basically have to, lock the code, start working on it, get everything ready to go so that there are no other changes or potential adverse issues that happen, so that we can get it out and at least get that first version out. When it comes to things like improved image quality when shooting in vlog, does it mean that everybody's going to necessarily see an improvement? Not necessarily. There can be very specific shooting scenarios where some people had reported challenges or issues, so our team starts working on those. Does that mean that we're done changing or updating or correcting things that are reported? Not at all. Usually it just means that the things that maybe some of you have reported up were after when we had already started working on this stuff, so you have to do things in chunks to make sure that you're not changing too many things at once and then causing a problem elsewhere. So, as far as what exactly was changing it, I don't have that particular set of details, but these firmware updates address what gets reported into us through various different timelines. When it comes to SD cards, that's just the common thing. Like I said, we have a list of validated SD cards that we have tested and worked with on the cameras. When we push an update on the camera, that helps bring both the camera and the cards into spec to understand how various different things work. While there are SD association specifications for the way cards are supposed to be working, there are also the lines of how the companies manage and work, how strict we hold to those rules. We traditionally are very strict when it comes to, if a card says it's V60, V90, whatever, we're holding that, the card should be built to what it's labeled as, but sometimes there are variants involved on the card side. So sometimes if we can mitigate some of it on our side, we'll try to, without compromising stability and quality and reliability that you expect from our products. The other thing is just the operational stability. So that could be anything like boot times. That could be, if someone reported a weird random hang up in the camera, things like that, depending on cards. A lot of times cards and system stability go hand in hand. So you see some of those updates. So the S5 Mark IIX, not a huge update, but if you've got the camera, definitely important to keep your cameras updated. Make sure you update to 1.1. It is available here on the website, and I will drop this link in the chat right here. So this is the S5iix firmware. If I can type, that would be amazing. All right, so that's the S5 Mark II firmware, S5 Mark IIX firmware, sorry. And then the major update that I think a lot of you have been looking forward to is the S5 Mark II firmware, the base model Mark II. A little bit of confusion online I've seen back and forth about this, and maybe it's the way the firmware update is worded. Excuse me, couldn't get to the mute button fast enough. Fighting off a little bit of a cold from my vacation. So, with the version 2.0 firmware update on the S5 Mark II, this is the update that brings RAW over HDMI into the Mark II platform. Well, the base model Mark II. This is where you will need either the Blackmagic Video Assist, and remember it has to be the 12G HDR variant, so that is either the 7-inch or the 5-inch, if you would like to be able to record Blackmagic RAW, or you could go with a few different Atomos devices, either the Atomos Ninja 5, Ninja 5 Plus, or even the Shogun Connect. Once you download the version 2.0 firmware and you install it on the camera, you're going to get a couple of new options. But if RAW is the primary thing that you wanted for that camera, there is one additional step, as you can see here. You do have to purchase the DMW-SHGR1 unlock key. This is what will enable you to have access to the RAW over HDMI functionality that's held within this firmware. And for those that are looking online for it, this is the same exact code that we used for the S1, so the original S1 full-frame camera from Lumix. We've spoken to a number of our dealers. I know globally we've been pushing to make sure that dealers are updating their website and their web listings for this code. So ultimately right now, just make sure that what you're purchasing is DMW-SFU2, and that will be the code that you need for unlocking RAW over HDMI. The unlocking process is the same as the S1, as well as cameras that we've done it to in the past, like the G9. What this will let you do here is when you go into the camera menu, let me move my face cam real quick here. What you'll see is in the menu, when you're on the new firmware, under the settings option, you will now see an option here called Activate. And when you go into Activate, and since I've got my camera set up the way I do, it won't let me do it. You'll click on Activate. It'll export out the serial number information and some other key kind of code information about the camera. You then take the code that is mailed to you, load that onto the websites, follow the instructions that are within the package that you receive. That will then generate an activation code that you can bring down, load into the camera on the SD card, and boom, you've got RAW over HDMI. Pretty straightforward. At this moment, you do have to have a printed code that is sent out to you. So yeah, make sure, just check your dealers, check wherever you purchase equipment from. They should have them. If they don't, we know that there are a number of our dealers, at least here in the US, that do have these codes available. So if you have an S5 Mark II and RAW over HDMI is the thing you've been waiting for, it is now available once you get that SFU unlock and you have version 2.0 installed. But that's not the only thing that was added in this update. In addition to the other improvements like were added on the S5 Mark IIX, there are also two new functions added to the Mark II that are already found in the Mark IIX. First of those is the Live View Composite functionality. So if you've never used Live View Composite is a photographic tool for our cameras, and I will just change over into the photo mode on the camera. Live View Composite is a function that we have in the camera that allows you to do multiple image merges in camera. I think it's probably an easy way to explain it. This is what will let you basically take the computational concept of photography where the camera can do the bulk of the heavy lifting for you so that you're not having to spend hours in post on a computer in Photoshop or Lightroom or whatever your editing software is to do things like computational merges. So the way you can access this is put the camera into manual photo mode. So that's just the M, not the M with the camcorder icon, just the M. And then you can assign one of the buttons to activate Live View Composite. I activate it through the front button on my S5 Mark II and my Mark IIX when I'm using it. And then you'll select LC, which is Live View Composite. Once that is selected, you're going to press that button again when you're in manual, and you'll say Live View Composite Start. And then you also have the option to turn on a shutter delay. So this would be if you've worked with the camera, you don't have a remote cable for it. You don't have a 2.5 millimeter, mini phone jack to plug in for a physical remote. This will allow you to tell the camera, hey, after I press the shutter, wait up to 8 seconds and then start the exposure. So we're going to leave that off for right now. And then to do a live view exposure or live view composition shot, just click Start. The camera's going to tell you, hey, I need to set the ISO and shutter speed to the exposure that I want, so I'm going to change these. You'll notice that Live View Composite lets you go down to 1.6 of a second, and then I can adjust my aperture here, so we'll go way underexposed so that this actually shows something. Once you have that set, you just half press the shutter, take an image. It would help if I put a memory card in the camera. Let's put a memory card in. There we go. So what that first image did is it takes a black frame for noise reduction. And then now on the bottom of the screen, you'll see it has 1/1.6 seconds times 0. You have a button to select end. And then you also have the histogram there so that you can watch the image build. So what you do here from that point is just press the shutter. And now it's going to just continuously build this image on the screen while you're shooting. So I can move the blue light that I have here, and as I bring it up, you'll see that it starts to change and build on top of that image. But I'm not getting a blown out photograph anymore. I'm getting an image that's only adding the new light to the image so that I can basically paint with light for a very specific look that I want to go for. And then once you're done, as you'll see here, this is a 30-second exposure in a well-lit scenario. When I half press the shutter, processes, saves the image out, and then when I review that, I get a JPEG and a RAW file, depending on how you have the camera set up. I have my camera, I believe, set up here as RAW plus fine, so that means that I have a full-blown RAW file, 14-bit, to work with, as well as a JPEG if it looks how I want it to look, and I'm good to go. You're set. Pretty super straightforward to work with. Live View Composite is one of the more fun features that I think we've had in our cameras. And now that it's available in the S5 Mark II, I am so excited about it because I've used it so much on my S5. I loved using it on the S5 Mark IIX before it was available on the 2. And I really look forward to seeing what people create with it because it's not just light painting. If you're someone who does astrophotography or you want to do shots where you get, the star trails, things like that, we do have previous streams about this. I'll try to remember to link it in the description and put a card up for it. It is just such a fun feature to work with, and it saves you hours on the PC side. So you're not having to take multiple images, merge them together in post. It just does it all for you. Aside from that, there is also, and I'll go back to the file here, there is also a new function added into the Mark II and the Mark IIX called Video Repair. Now, this, for anyone that's been around with the Lumix brand long enough, there are some times where if you have a power loss, if you're using third-party battery solutions, if you are externally powering the camera and you don't have any kind of redundant power source, or, again, you're not using factory batteries, there are situations where the camera can have a power loss. And what that can cause is a corrupted video file. So what we've put into the camera now in the Mark II and the Mark IIX is a tool to be able to repair those files for you. So what this looks like here is if I start a quick recording here, you'll see I've got red frame on because I've got the info display out over HDMI. I'm recording a real quick clip here, and then I'm going to do something you should never, ever, 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 ever do, and that's drop the battery. So what I just did there was create a corrupted video file. When that happens, and dropped power solutions is what typically causes this. That video file now never closed properly. It doesn't, your software and your camera is not going to know what to do with it. So, but you can see that I can just click record again and it starts recording, right? So what we built into the camera here is the ability to go into the menu and actually, because I've got this, let me go into playback. We'll see, we're going to be looking at the playback menu. I'm going to go into the actual playback setup menu. So this is as if I'm in playback and I hit menu. And then you'll now see an option called video repair. So I can click video repair, click on card slot 1. No repairable videos were found, actually, because, oh, I did that wrong. What it will do is, because the file is corrupted because of power, it'll search through and say, hey, I found this video. This is, it's a broken video. I need to fix it. You'll see video can't be repaired. May be possible to repair it. So if we do video, go in here. Did I do this wrong? Oh, hang on. Of course, when I'm trying to show it to you, and I'm not doing this the right way, I'm forcing it to fail in a way that you wouldn't fail it. This built-in setup is designed so that it will scan through and say, hey, found this video, there's a problem on it, let's repair it by using the other videos that you've recorded on the card. And what that does is it basically takes it, compares everything, corrects or tries to correct the information there, and depending on how the failure happened and what was the root cause of it, whether it's a memory card, if it's a power drop, whatever that particular challenge and problem was that caused a video file to fail, the system will do everything it can to fix it in camera. Now, this does not replace the Lumix repair tool if you're on Windows. You still do have the ability to take this file, bring it onto your computer, and then do a correction to it or try the different repair software out there and try to recover it. So ultimately, yeah, this was just added as that ability for if you're in the field and you have an issue and an unexpected problem, it's a first line to attempt to fix, knowing that there are so many different issues that can come up, whether it's a card failure, whether it's a battery failure, whether you drop a lens off and it just totally drops the file out. You have different capabilities to at least try to repair it in camera on site. Before I go on too far, I just saw a whole bunch of other questions come in here. I want to make sure I get those covered in here. What's the major difference in the S5II and S5iix? That is going to be the next topic I go into. Oh, thank you, YouTube. Wondering 24 to 70. We did that one. SSD. Super pleased. Okay, Steve, this is where I dropped off here. Super pleased to find fast burst mode, focus, shutter release issue is resolved in a new firmware. Thanks to the team. Yep. On the Mark II, I believe 1.1 added some of those corrections to it. So, and then on version 2, we're always looking, and if we find a little bit better way to do something, we'll always try to kind of update it and make those things a little bit better. Let's see here. Do you know when is the S5II shipping? Some delays in Canada, I hear. So the S5 Mark IIX has been shipping. It is like very heavily exceeding the pre-orders that many of our dealers took for it. So if you weren't on a pre-order list with any of your major dealers, there's a possibility that you're going to have to wait a little bit for it. There are many dealers that are much smaller that are part of our authorized dealers, at least here in the US, that should have some inventory. If you really need one right away, I encourage you to take a look at the other Lumix dealers that are out there. If you absolutely need it right now, but most importantly, stay in touch with your dealer as they're coming in, and this goes for everywhere across the globe. As they're coming in, they're going out. So the more you keep on with your dealer, have a good relationship with someone that you're buying your equipment from, often, you'll be kept in the loop as to where they are. But from our side, from the brand side, they are shipping. We're shipping them out as fast as we can. And we've seen a lot of people picking them up, getting them. So it's been an awesome camera. Let's see here. What is the advantage of adding LUTs in Lumix Tether versus adding the LUT in camera? Is the quality the same when when during a live stream at Lumix Tether? So the addition of LUTs in Lumix Tether really is just because there have been some users that are working in higher end productions where they've wanted to be able to take that capability that we've got in the cameras, specifically because we've seen it in the Mark II and the Mark IIX, and just be able to quickly turn and run projects. As much as I know, when we look at the Facebook groups, the forums, Instagram, all of this, even on YouTube, there's a lot of, I'd say, playing with images. And I don't mean playing as a negative thing. It's that a lot of us love to strive for the most perfect looking piece of footage in the world. However, time is money for a lot of people. So if you're able to do anything, especially if you're working with cameras in a remote sense, like using Lumix Tether, being able to apply the look that you've already created for the job, especially if you know like how you're controlling lighting and like the actual shooting scenario, being able to apply the look right there and be able to see it in Lumix Tether and be able to control what you want with it becomes a big benefit. So for many of those users, that's why it was added in for Lumix Tether. For someone like myself, I do live streaming with the Mark II, and I am using real-time LUT over the vlog footage so that I can have it in a 709 look, basically kind of how I like it to look for YouTube. Given that YouTube tends to compress the hell out of stuff and kind of like really crush shadows, you can preload your own look in there to do this. It's just more control. While, yeah, shooting in Vlog or shooting in RAW formats is going to give you the ultimate flexibility, sometimes jobs just don't either pay enough for that, or it's just not worth your time to necessarily do all of that extra work, depending on the output that you're going to be, kind of working in. So, yeah, the real-time LUT feature in the camera, whether you're using it for photography or videography, can be a really fun, useful tool for you. And we're trying to add it, where we can. When you're working on the Lumix Tether software, it's much easier to add it versus taking an older camera like an S5 or the S1 series. Because you got to remember, those are different processors. The engines that we use in the Mark II, the Mark IIX, are vastly different than what were used in the previous cameras. So there are some things that unfortunately won't be able to be backported to the older platform because it requires the newer engine to work with, or just requires more power. Because remember, the new processor that we're using in the S5 Mark II and Mark IIX is the L² technology engine, and it's like twice as fast as what we've used in previous cameras. So it has a lot more power behind it than the previous ones did. Let's see here. Tommy says, I know you've had issues with the Samsung T7 for SSD recording on the X, but that's all I got, and I really want to test it. Will using it damage the camera or the drive itself? Safely, I can say no. You will not be causing damage. You can use whatever hard drive you want to use with the camera. The reason we post the whole validated drive list is specifically because of how many options there are. You've got, every company under the sun is making SSDs of some level, whether it's M.2s, NVMe, it's, standard, even enclosures like this stuff, like older style enclosures. They're all drives, and if you don't know what you're looking for, or at least have a base of an area to start with, that's where you can run into some problems. And if you're out in the middle of a shoot, you don't want issues where, the thing may just stop working on you. So while I tell you that, look, the Samsung T7s, to my knowledge, I've tested one before, I have had them drop off on me, where they just disconnect randomly from the camera. Does that mean it's going to happen in every single scenario? No, but if it drops out once, that's not acceptable for us. So that's why we do not and cannot recommend them yet. The T5s, they run faster speeds, they run lower power consumption. The SanDisk drives are, in my opinion, infinitely more reliable for what we've been working with. At the current state, things are always changing. Firmware is always coming out on drives. So while you use the T7s, it's not going to hurt your camera. You're not going to hurt your drive. The only thing that can really ever potentially hurt the drive is if you're, massive, like running into major problems where it's just constantly disconnecting because of power. It's the same logic you'd take if you're using that drive on a computer. You don't want to unplug and plug and unplug and plug over and over again, because eventually you can corrupt footage on that drive or files, however you're using it. So just be careful. All of that being said, I do not recommend using T7s, especially if you're someone who's making money with this. Having to reshoot and claim on your insurance to reshoot a job is infinitely more expensive than just buying the right media or recommended media, whether that's SD cards or SSDs on these cameras. I don't care what brand you're using. Using one of our cameras or using one of the competitors' cameras, buy good media. You're spending, $1,500 to $6,000 on camera equipment. Why buy a $30 card just because theoretically it should be okay? Don't do that to yourself. Buy good media. Yes, it's a little more expensive. If it means you have to wait for, one more job to come through to get that good media, do that. It's better to buy that than to run into a situation where you've got failed or corrupted footage because the storage solution that you're working with is cheaper. Let's see here. Ling says, I've updated my S5II to firmware 2.0. Any instructions on how to buy the code and activate it to utilize ProRes RAW on the Atomos Ninja 5? Yeah, so go to your, whoever your dealer of choice is that you purchased your equipment from. You want to search DMW-SHGR1. Keith has also dropped in another search term there for his references B&H Photo. Go to any dealer that you prefer to work with, search for DMW-SHGR1. They're going to mail you a code in a box. You take that box, and in that box has the instructions with the website that you go to and the step-by-step on how to install it on your camera. I don't know if I've done a SFU2 unlock stream. I can probably do it within the next couple of weeks. I just have to get a code because my two S5s, S5 Mark IIs do not have the unlock run on them. So, yeah, I will have to see. I might be able to do it next week or the week after. It kind of depends. Coming back from a vacation has meant that I'm catching up on a lot of emails and a lot of planning for the next couple of streams. Tommy says, if I understand correctly, 640 and 4000 are the best performing ISO levels in Vlog. What about other picture profiles? Do they have other optimal levels, or is it simply less is best? It depends on what you're shooting. If you're doing like landscape work, like I love doing landscape work, photography landscape work. I tend to shoot as low as I can. So on the S5 Mark II platform, it's going to be ISO 100. I'm usually using standard color profile because I shoot in RAW. My JPEGs will be in the real-time LUT functionality. So I have a couple of LUTs that I've got converted over from the Art of Photography. Reach out to Ted Forbes, check out his LUT packs for Lightroom, Photoshop, Capture One, all that stuff. They're awesome. But I have, I'm lucky enough to have a version of some of those that I can plug into the camera that lets me emulate those for my JPEGs in camera. So I will be shooting with a standard color profile as base at ISO 100, which means that my native ISOs in standard, so that's standard, neutral, landscape, portrait, those color profiles is going to be 100 and 640. When you go to Cinelike D, it is 200 and 2500, and then Vlog is 640, 4000, and I believe HLG is HLG is different. I have to double check on what the HLG native ISO ranges are, but that lets you go through. A really easy way to tell this is if you go into the camera, and we'll do this right now. If I go into the camera right now, if we look, I'm in one of the real-time LUT color profiles. So if I change this to Cinelike V2, if I go into the actual camera menu, and then I change my dual native ISO sensitivity to low, and then ISO sensitivity for video, you'll see that the lowest I can go is 200. That means that that is my low range base or native ISO. If I change this to high, you'll see that it's 1250. So I was wrong. Cinelike D2 and Cinelike V2 are 200 and 1250. If I change my color profile to HLG, if I have it visible. I might not have HLG visible because I don't ever shoot in it, but we can change that really quickly. Your HLG color profile, which is designed for direct to shoot out for HDR visuals, that lets you change things a little bit, and that does have its own native sets of ISOs. I just have to remember where it is in the menu, because geez, do we have a lot of stuff in these menus. I have to make sure I don't lose my voice again. Let us see here. I know I am not being that dumb that I can't remember where even some of our stuff is in the menus. Although it is quite possible, because I never have to go in and change this. So we will go in here. I'm pretty sure it's under here somewhere. Q menu settings, operation log, exposure display, joystick. This is thrilling content, isn't it, everybody? Watching me go through a camera menu here. I'm sure people are just hanging around getting ready to jump off this stream because of that. Photo style settings right in front of me. Show and hide photo styles. You'll see that you can turn them off. Like I have L Classic Neo turned off. I have flat turned off. But I can come in here and I can turn on like 2100 and 2100 full range. These are two different color profile ranges that are available that allow you to, for one, HLG is within the specification for luminance range that HLG is designed for. Knowing that many users have been taking HLG to actually do grading with, we added in an HLG full range option that just expands what the range is available for your HLG functionality. So I do have them on. So if I go in here and go into my photo styles, they should be showing up, unless it's because of the way I have my camera rigged up. It's quite possible, because I've got the HDMI attached, which also does kind of change a bunch of that stuff. So, yeah. So, yeah, your base ISOs, 640, 4000 for Vlog, 200, 1250 for Cinelike D2 and V2, and 100 and 640 for standard color profiles, which includes like 709. Steve says, if I've already purchased the unlock key for the G9, I assume that I still need to buy a second one, or is there a way to deactivate on the G9 and activate on the S5 Mark II? The G9 uses a different code that uses the SFU1 code, not the SFU2. So they are separate codes. You would have to buy a new code for that one. Leo, managed to get dust on the sensor of my S5 Mark IIX. Any advice on how to clean best practice cleaning products with the least amount of risk? So I don't have it sitting on my desk, unfortunately. As a brand, I do not recommend cleaning your own sensors. Use a service for that. Use us for that. However, it's your camera. You can do with it what you will. As far as cleaning goes, there are many options out there. The most kind of simple and straightforward one would be to use a hand pump air blower. Yeah, I don't have one with, I don't know where it is. Might actually be in my bag from the trip. these are very simple. It's literally, I mean, we used to call them rocket blowers because they look like rockets. Use one of those. That'll help you blow the dust out that's loose. If you still have dust on the sensor with that, if it was from changing lenses, if you're in a humid environment, so on and so forth, then there are wet cleaning solutions out there. I do not ever recommend, if you have no experience doing it and you're afraid of the risks, do not perform your own sensor cleanings. Bring them to a service center. Have a professional clean it. It is just better to to err on the safe side, especially when it's, if you're spending the money on the camera. So yeah, the least amount of risk is an air blower, a hand air blower. Do not use compressed air in a can. Compressed air in a can has chemicals in it, and if you happen to stir them up and spray the sensor with those chemicals, or the cover glass, you're not actually spraying the sensor, you can damage the sensor. Excuse me, couldn't get to the mute button again. Sorry. Let's see here. After years, there's still no live view composite on the S1 cameras. Is this a technical restriction, or do you have any idea why this is not offered? For me, it is just a firmware. So it is not just a firmware. Live view composite is a lot more complicated than it sounds, because the processor has to be able to actually take all the information from that sensor, merge it together in real time, produce the image for you, and then encode that image in the end. My understanding is the generation of the processors that we used in the S1, S1R, and S5iix are incapable of doing this functionality. The S5 used a new variant of that engine, and then now with the S5 Mark II and Mark IIX, excuse me, it is a totally different engine that we're using there. So whether or not the original S1s will ever get it, I kind of doubt it. My understanding of talking with the teams is that they're just not capable of doing the live view composite functionality. The smaller sensor cameras, if you're in like a G95, G100, those cameras do have live view composite, and again, it's a combination of the engine and the sensor that's being used. Sensors do need to be able to read out fast enough and so on, to be able to get you all of that kind of capability. Let's see here. Oh man, really got to make sure I don't lose my voice. Hey Sean, will we ever see BRAW coming to the GH6? An update to the non-Leica lenses to work better in AF with the GH6. My G9 and GH5 focus faster with non-Leica lenses than my GH6. I'd have to be... honestly don't know about BRAW on the GH6. I wouldn't strike it out as something that's not possible. Know that when there's cycles, right? So the S5 Mark II and the Mark IIX, those are the newest cameras. They're the ones that are getting probably the biggest eyes on the brand right now. So those have the largest amount of feedback coming in. They're the newest. So they get a lot of the lion's share of R&D time at the moment to make sure that, all the little stuff, especially because it's the new platform, to make sure that all the little stuff, your feedback, is being implemented as fast as possible. Excuse me again, sorry. Does that mean that development is not happening on cameras like the GH6? No, not at all. Development is happening on those cameras. Whether that means Blackmagic RAW comes or not, I don't know. But the more you let us know what stuff you want to see in cameras like the GH6, the better it is at us being able to align and focus our engineers' time, the resources we have, the code development for making improvements on those cameras. Yeah, it can help with some of that stuff the more you let us know. As far as lenses go, probably the biggest thing to make sure is, one, that lenses are updated, but you probably already know that. Most of you already know that. Make sure your lenses are updated. Depending on how old lenses that you're using, some of the quite old versions of the lenses just don't have fast enough motors for the newer system, and they change what modes they operate in. So yeah, there can still be some little differences, but yeah, little challenges there. Tommy says, apparently the reason I can't open S5iix RAW files in Affinity is because Apple hasn't added support yet. Any idea when support might be added? Are there alternatives besides Adobe? When would Apple add it? Well, Apple will add support when they feel like it. This is Apple. Companies don't get to dictate to companies like Apple when they push an update. Information gets provided, they add it into their update cycles, and then they do it when they're ready to go for it, basically. RAW software aside from Adobe that does have support. I know Capture One did release for the S5 Mark II. I have yet to test S5 Mark II X files. Not the show. S5 Mark II X files in the in Capture One yet. I have to double check, but they should be pretty similar. That might come sooner. So outside of that, one thing you could do for Affinity, you could use Adobe's DNG converter. At least get them from the RW2 files that we use into a DNG, which I know Affinity can work with. This way, at least you have your editing software that you're comfortable with. You should still retain if the program knows how to view the color profiles. Most of those programs don't. Adobe seems to be the only one that has any interest in adding them in, since that information's there. So, yeah, as of right now, I'd recommend, if Affinity is your program, Tommy, use the Adobe DNG converter. It's free. At least get all your files converted to DNG as a copy. And then you can work with them in Affinity for now, until Apple decides to add as an OS level support for the RAW files. Any affordable ND filters in general you could recommend with the S5II or 2X? Been looking at the NISI system. Any thoughts on it? I am not the best to ask about filtration. I would ask someone like Dennis. I know I'm throwing you under the bus there, Dennis. But I would ask some of the others in the chat what they recommend. Because there's a difference between what, from a photography sense, may be good, versus a video sense, which is actually, like, right to use. ND filters have color casts. They have different levels of IR, kind of absorption, stuff like that. The number one brand that I use filter-wise is traditionally Kalari Vision. But that's because I work a lot with the infrared stuff, and I just love their filters in general. But I do also have some cheaper filters that I've worked with that get the job done for me, but it depends on the level of what you need to kind of work with. Man. Kudos. Why have MFT and GH cameras been removed from Lumix Pro services? I can't register my new GH6. That I don't know. I believe in the US they are still included in the program. So that might just be the region that LPS is for in your region. Let's double check here. Lumix Pro services in the United States. Oh man, thank you all for bearing with me with the coughing and having to take some water there. Let's see here. Yeah, on the US side, cameras are still actually still very available for it. So if I go to the desktop, this is the Lumix Pro Services US site. Qualifying bodies, the FZ cameras, the G series cameras, even the GM1, LX cameras, the entire S series, TS, ZS cameras. So they're all within what's available for you to register with. Typically, if you just purchased a brand new camera, so like the S5 Mark II and Mark IIX, they are here now. But if you tried to register within like the first week, the site may have still been updating and populating that information out. But yeah, at least in the US, it is available. And the Micro Four Thirds stuff is still available for registration. Let's see here. Is real-time LUT coming to the GH6 4K live crop? The S5II has even 2K live crop. That I don't know, honestly, Andy. I wish I knew. My S5 Mark II won't let me display on both HDMI feed and LCD. Is there a fix? So, this is one of the things that has been asked, actually, in some of the different groups. So, I assume, Andreas, that you're asking about the info display here. So, info display, and actually, yeah, I believe you were, because that was a group of the first questions there. Yeah, is it possible to have info on both external monitor and LCD? So, on the S5 Mark II and the Mark IIX at this time, you have to choose which display has info display on. If you are running the camera and you go into your HDMI rec output, info display on is going to push the information display out over HDMI and leave the in-camera display clear. So think of it as just kind of reversing it, right? So I have info display on right now, so I can show you in the live stream what's going on. But if I come in and turn that off, you see I get that clean display, but on my camera is where I see that information. That is just how the system works right now. There isn't a way to do both displays having information on both of them. So a little bit of a, for some people, it's been great. Other people don't really care about it, and some people really want to have it on both. At this time, it's one or the other. I'm just not even going to try to go for the mute button anymore if I cough, so I apologize. Alongside of that, one of the other questions that had come up is the enlarged display. So if you want to be able to use punch-in focus while, say, you're manually focusing, but you want it to be able to show over HDMI, that is where the enlarged live display option in the HDMI menu is going to be what you're looking for. So what you'll see here is that when it's off, enlarged display over HDMI is disabled, outputs the resolution that matches the video quality. This means that if I'm not using HDMI info display out and I manually focus, my camera will punch in, but my external won't. Then you have mode 2, which changes the way it works. Live view is enlarged even during video recording, and the output resolution is going to be full HD 60p or less. So if you're in 4K, it's not going to do it. And then you have mode 1, live view enlarged only before recording video. So while you're recording, it would be disabled. So there's a couple different options here for punch-in over HDMI, but by default, it's going to be turned off on this camera, mainly because of the logic that, one, the higher resolution options are much more demanding on this camera when you've got higher bit rates, depending on whether you're a 2 or a 2X. But also because the vast majority of things that we've dealt with over the years is that we get a ton of calls of people saying, hey, I was recording to my external recorder, and when I manually focused, it punched the whole footage in. What the hell? So some of those things change as firmware comes out, because you start to get to a point where, well, the vast majority of people may be having a challenge with this, so let's address it. Does that make it a little more difficult for some others? Yeah. But we're always open to the feedback. So the more you give us feedback of how you want these cameras to work, the more we can take it into consideration as we're working on firmware, as we're working on future products, to kind of adjust that stuff. Dino says, during long exposure, does the S5 Mark II show remaining exposure countdown? It does not. I think he was back at GH4 was one of the last cameras that we did the countdown on the display. I could be wrong. It was quite a while ago. But yeah, the cameras don't do a countdown on the display while you're actually taking that long exposure. Yes, Chris. Perfect timing. BH1S ProRes RAW rig question. So you have a couple of options there. Let me grab my... Which one is this? This is my BH1S. So BH1S here, we're talking about how do you rig this camera up for doing things like RAW over HDMI. So if you've ever worked with one of these cameras, RAW over HDMI, obviously, as the name says, it's coming out over the HDMI. But when you have RAW over HDMI coming out, it means that you have no information display over that HDMI port. This can be challenging in some scenarios because you still want to be able to see the information. You want to be able to manipulate the camera, control different settings. And RAW over HDMI requires that signal to be just raw data, and then the recorder is doing the compilation to create the file. While you have RAW over HDMI running, your SDI connection does have the ability to still send out the information, and you can tell the camera over SDI, send that information out. So that will allow you to do it simultaneously. How to rig it? It's going to depend. There are a couple different choices that you can do. If you're using a monitor, I believe, and I have to double check this while we're here. Actually, no, it's not going to make any sense. So the Atomos Ninja 5's only going to have HDMI in, which means that the video feed that you're going to have is only going to have RAW over HDMI. You're not going to have any info display. So in a case like that, that's where a mobile device using the Lumix Sync app can help. The other option would be with one of the firmware updates, we did allow you to toggle it so that you can quickly toggle RAW on and off. That may be the fastest way because some of it's going to depend on how quick you need to work. Typically, a lot of times, as I've been told, the RAW workflow is you're shooting RAW, that's how you're going with it, and then you just kind of move on with it. You're not making a ton of changes while you're in the particular scene that you're capturing. So in a case like that, stopping the recording because that clip is done, now you have to adjust settings, change it, would be clicking through the button and changing it that way. The other option is really just kind of becoming familiar with the different settings and using your scopes and stuff to adjust your iris and stuff like that. If you're using a manual lens, you're doing that manually. If you're using our lenses, then again, using something like the app is probably going to be your better choice there. Let's see here. Using Vlog View Assist LUTs produces pretty noticeable posterization for me. Can you tell me if it's even possible to replicate exact like 709 look for View Assist, the original S5? Yeah, 100% it is. Most likely it's because the LUT that you've loaded in is incorrect, or there's some sort of problem with the LUT that you've put on for the way it's working. So I would double check the LUT. You want to use either 17-point or no more than 33-point LUTs. If you're trying to use, was it 65-point LUTs, it's overkill. But you also have to be careful with that LUT that you're putting on the camera. So make sure, it's the first place I'd look. Double check the LUTs that you're using because they shouldn't be causing a problem. Check out LUTs from like 55M, so Dennis. Check out LUTs from a number of the other companies that are out there. There's a lot of good 709 conversion LUTs that are already tested, work fine with the camera, work fine in the way that you're trying to use them. Yeah, so I would double check that. Is there some in-depth guide on how to use live streaming features of the S5iix and the GH5 Mark II I could refer to? Many users seem to not know where to even start. Yes. I've done a live stream on it, actually, way back for the GH5 Mark II. I plan on, within the next couple of weeks, doing an actual live stream on the S5 Mark IIX out in the field, where I will go over that as well. And then we do have a site on our website that kind of walks through it for Panasonic. I will see if I can dig that up and drop it in the chat for you. On the IIX, if you plug in an SSD drive to the USB-C port that usurps power, there are docking stations that will pass power to the laptop while it can write to an SSD. I understand what you're wanting it to do, Keith, but it does not work on the Mark IIX for docking stations. There's way too many variabilities. There's too many quality control issues. And at this point, I don't believe our system was designed to work that way. So at the moment, it's SSD support or power over SSD. They're not going to be able to be combined at the time right now. Can you show us how to update the firmware? Yeah, sure. I can kind of walk through a little bit of that for you. So one of the first things that you're going to do is you're going to go to the website, which I will drop for the S5 Mark II here. S5II firmware. So you will go to the link that I just dropped in the chat. That will bring you directly to the actual firmware download file page. You will, from here, click on download. That will save the .bin file. And you want to make sure that it is this exact file that you're using. So it'll say S5M2_V20.bin. If you are on a Mac, make sure that Safari is not set to try to decompress the .bin file. .bin files can be tricked in some cases where your Mac OS is going to unzip the zip file, and then it sees that it's a .bin file, and it tries to unzip that, and then you get a .bin.tgz. That's not good. Or you get a prompt that says, hey, you can't unzip this. Just make sure the file says .bin. Take that, put it right on the root of your memory card. So that means in the file where it says DCIM, private, any other folder that may be created if you've got saved camera settings. And then from there, you're just going to put it into your camera. Once it's in the camera, power the camera on, put it in program. And actually, first step above all of this, use a fresh card, put a card in the camera, format it, take one photo with it, so you set the file format, then put the file on the card. If you're on a MacBook, make sure you eject the SD card from the computer. Don't just pull the card. Same on Windows. Once you've got all that out of the way, put the card in the camera, and then you're just going to go into the menu, go down to the wrench, the setup menu, and then on the end here, you'll see firmware version. Click on that, and then just do firmware update. It'll look for that file, put it in the camera, and you're good to go. One thing that I do recommend, don't use large cards. If you've got a 32 gig or a 64 gig floating around, use those, and you're good to go. Larger cards tend to potentially cause a challenge where it may not find it on the first run through when you're trying to do the firmware update. You just gotta, using lower capacity cards, typically better. Lower capacity cards are faster than higher capacity cards. So hopefully that helps. Is there something to look out for? And I hope it will be fixed in the next future firmware update. There are cases where it doesn't respond at all until the small AF button is pressed. Definitely check with the new firmware update. See, like that is stuff that goes under operational stability. If people have gotten some questions there, you would see where that would be added in or corrected. Not all the time that stuff is going to be like openly shouted out that, hey, this has been corrected or not. That just kind of falls under general stability because not everyone has that problem. Some people do. Some people, the lenses are out of date in firmware, all that kind of fun stuff. But I can double check and see from my side now that I've got all my cameras updated, and then report back next week. Is the S5iix's 2TB external SSD recording limit able to be increased via firmware update? That I don't know. File structure and storage capacity stuff is a very different conversation. It depends on whether or not the system OS is able to recognize larger than 2 terabytes. So honestly, I'm not sure. I have asked it before, but man, it was a while ago. It was back when the GH6 launched. So I'd have to follow up again and see if there is plans, if it's possible. One thing to know is that usually the higher in capacity you go, the slower the speeds are for the drives. 2 terabyte is kind of like that Goldilocks spot for SSDs. Gets you a good, comfortable space, but also you're not drawing so much power. You're not giving up too much speed because you're going for capacity. SSDs are still in that kind of flux point where, yeah, there are really fast SSDs and they're really expensive, but there are more large capacity slower drives than there are small capacity or smaller capacity fast drives. I think I said that right, or reverse that if I said it wrong. But that's one of the reasons why I like the ProBlade system. I've got my 1 and 2 terabyte mags. Gives me the speeds I need, gives me the flexibility I need for being able to offload footage. Condor makes that handle, so if you're someone who rigs your camera up in a cage, you've got the handle that integrates everything, kind of nice. But if you're someone who uses T5s or, you're using the E81, E61s, they're great drives as well. Especially if you've got something as simple as like, one of these little spring clamps from like Small Rig or something. Or even Condor. Tommy says, I saw the G90 listed somewhere as being able to use Lumix Tether, but I can't find anything official on the Lumix website. Is this correct, and does the G95 work with Lumix Tether? Let me double check. I actually honestly can't remember. I don't use my G90 or 95 very often. So the G90 or G95, the same camera, different regions, is not compatible with Lumix Tether. The G9 is. So if you're looking for a list of compatible cameras for Lumix Tether, I will drop this in the chat right here. So that's a list of compatibility for Lumix Tether. Cool. So I want to wrap this stream up with talking about what I had mentioned that we were going to talk about 2 weeks ago, and in the post I made on Facebook about, kind of traveling with the Lumix cameras. And, there is a lot of the stuff that we've talked about, things like live view composite, real-time LUT, those are things that separate us from a lot of the other camera companies out there. They are features and tools that are built into these cameras that are designed to give you control over the images. So when I say that the S5 Mark II X, and it's the X in my opinion, the Mark II, S5, they're all going to be fine for it. But my personal opinion is that the X is the perfect travel photography and videography camera, the true hybrid camera in the industry. There's a lot to be said about having a camera that's got a hard switch to jump between photo and video. Cool, I get it. But being able to seamlessly, just with one change of a dial, be able to jump between photo and video, have your settings separated, have your looks already set into the camera, have the various different photo tools that you want in the camera, and have the connectivity to your mobile device. There's just something really, kind of special about that combination when you're going to be traveling and you may be limited on what you can bring with you. So for the last 2 weeks, while I've been going cross country with my family, just taking some time, wanting a camera that I can bring with me and just be able to go, spend time with my family, with my nephew, being able to go out into the mountains and, do some photographs there. Be able to have the camera in the car with me while we're driving and just kind of having something ready to go with me. The Mark II X was that, kind of perfect setup. And I did not bring mine actually in with me. But there's a couple reasons for that. So for one, if you're traveling, whether you're doing it in the United States or you're doing it abroad, wherever you are, there's a lot to be said about being able to be inconspicuous or not call attention to yourself with your camera equipment. There are things that people look for while you're traveling to know whether or not you've got something that's of value. If you've got a camera, any camera, and you've got a giant white brand logo right on the top of it, kind of flashy, white designed screen printing on everything, it looks... It stands out. It sticks out like a sore thumb to someone who's walking around, may have ill intentions, or if you're a street photographer and you're trying to not draw attention to yourself, someone will recognize this. We've seen this, kind of silhouette for decades. We know what these look like. But something as simple as just blacking out all the logos on it, like we did on the X, means that now I get no reaction from people. If I'm walking through the streets of New York, if I'm walking through the streets of downtown Austin, if I'm walking through Salt Lake City, like where I was, no one looks at the camera because it's not triggering subconsciously, oh, hey, there's a camera there. So that's one thing that made the Mark IIX my camera of choice for the last 2.5 weeks that I've been away. 2 weeks for vacation. The other thing is that with our system, like I mentioned in a couple of posts that I make on my Instagram page, and in general we've talked about before, is pretty much no matter what style of photographer or videographer you are, the Mark IIX becomes the camera that is like a chameleon. It does what you need it to do without getting in the way. What I mean by that is I love shooting landscape in a little bit more of obscure aspect ratios. So that would be either a 2:1 aspect ratio or a 65:24 aspect ratio. And we've talked about these before. So if I put my camera back into the photo mode, I'll show you what I mean. It's that right in camera, because of things like real-time LUT, and I'll talk about that in a second, because I've grown to the point where I will shoot RAW plus JPEG, but I will take RAW files and edit them if I feel like it. Otherwise, if the JPEG comes out the way I like it, that's what I'm using. I have the ability to come in here and actually set my camera up with an aspect ratio that is a traditional side-by-side 3:2 aspect ratio option. So if you've ever come from film and you've seen cameras like the X-Pan, that camera would shoot a dual side-by-side 3:2 aspect ratio double wide image. That gives you a super wide angle field of view, depending on the lens you throw on it. That means that I have that built into the camera. My JPEGs are going to have that 65:24 look. So I get that, kind of wide angle aspect, that almost panoramic look. If I'm looking to make kind of a cinematic still, you get the black bars, you get the wide angle, that kind of thing. But our cameras have the ability that you have the full raw image even when you shoot with these aspect ratios. So I'm able to shoot all day long framing for 65:24, but hey, something happened where, something's just coming into frame, like up over here, and I want to reframe it. Well, my RAW file has that. I'm able to take that, put it in the computer, click on crop, and it shows me the full 3:2, full resolution image. We're kind of one of the only ones doing that in the market. As I said, I also like shooting in the 2:1 aspect ratio, so I get a little bit taller. You still have that flexibility. So this is one of the big reasons why this is the camera I took on the vacation travel with me. The other thing is, and I've said this so many times since we launched the camera, is the real-time LUT functionality from a video perspective, and the ability to come in and add in your own LUTs over specific base color profiles. So as I said earlier, I use my camera in standard when it comes to photography, and I use the S5 Mark IIX primarily as a photography tool. For like 90% of the work I do, it's all photography. But that means that I can take my standard color profile, I can make tweaks that I want to it, but then I can come in and I can assign a LUT on top of that color profile. So in my case, I'm using a version of the Art of Photography presets that Ted Forbes makes over there, so definitely show him love, that mimic Fujifilm and Kodak film stocks from decades ago. And these are mimics, so that allows me to come in and set different things. Like, I always want to shoot at 640 ISO. I want to have auto white balance cool because this is a Fujifilm emulation. I want, in this case, it's Provia 100 is what I'm, kind of mimicking and creating on here. That means that my JPEG is going to have this look to it, but my RAW file is still going to be the standard color profile. So then when I bring it into software, I have a standard looking file. I'm able to then take that, bring it into software, and if I want to apply the look that I was shooting before, I can apply the look I was shooting before and then not have to really change anything. So, like, this is the S5 Mark IIX. I was in New York for the first part of my trip. This is down on Wall Street. You'll see that I've got a couple of these LUTs here. I can come in and say, hey, I want to use my that Velvia look that I had. Well, I just throw it on there and it looks exactly like the JPEG was. If I took a shot and I have, an ultra wide aspect ratio, so if I come in and say this was shot in 65:24, Say I want to come in and I want to change the crop because maybe I didn't actually like the way that crop was. I wanted it to be, 2:1. I can just click on the crop overlay and you see I have all of that image still there in the file. So yeah, this gives me the tool that I can shoot it however I want to see it. I don't have to think about while I'm using the camera, am I in the right aspect ratio? Did I make sure to select the right color profile? Because I can always change them. And yes, RAW files always let you work with all that kind of stuff, but I get just full functionality with this camera. If I wanted to change this into 2:1 ratio, I've got it customized in here so that I can make a 2:1 ratio if I wanted it, get me a little bit more height on that image. And then I can always come in and change the look again, to get me that particular look. The other cool thing is that with our camera, the S5 Mark II, Mark IIX, actually all of them, we use the Lumix Sync app. So I'm able to take my mobile device and I'm able to take the looks that I want. I can load in those particular presets into Lightroom Mobile. I'm able to have the RAW files sent right from my camera into my mobile device. I'm able to do my edits with it, and within minutes, if I didn't like the way the JPEG came out, I've got the RAW file on my mobile device while I'm shooting. It's automatically sending those files onto here. Obviously, you have to have a relatively large storage amount on your device, but I get that full capability to do the edits I want, just like I do if I'm working on my desktop with it. And before I worked for Panasonic, I worked in retail for the photo industry. Even today, I have not found a system that is more seamless than what we're able to do with it. Whether I'm working on Android or iOS, primarily I work on Android though, just because one, I love having a phone that has a gigantic screen on it. Just makes editing a little bit easier. And our camera just plays super straightforward with it. If I want to do long exposure astrophotography, I'm able to use my phone as a Bluetooth device for the remote triggering for it. So I can sit in the car while I'm out in, say, middle of the mountains in Utah. I'm able to set the camera up, take a bunch of pictures, not have to stand out in the cold, be in the car with the Bluetooth connected to trigger those images. I can have it open so I can actually view the images. These are all those kind of combined things that make the camera itself my choice for travel and photography. Now, when it comes to video-wise, 2 weeks ago, the stream that I did while I was in New York and pre-recorded that was done on the S5 Mark IIX. And the best part about that was I was able to shoot it in ProRes because I was working on a laptop that handles ProRes better than H.265 or even some H.264 footage. So I'm able to shoot an efficient codec that works on the laptop that I'm working with. Not saying that ProRes is definitely the most efficient out there, but I'm able to use the one camera, the same camera I had been earlier that day walking around the streets of New York with, now set it up, be able to shoot and capture awesome video, be able to use face and eye detection with the autofocus and have it work, not have to think about any of these things, and then be able to just edit super quickly. So you have tons of options with this guy. I was recording to the SD cards because I was only doing 1080. It's a YouTube video. I didn't need it right off the bat for all of those shots. And then I had an SSD attached for the 4K parts of the segment that I needed so I could upload the whole video as 4K. And it just works. It's seamless. And the best part is it's one tool that you bring with you. Take this one camera, couple of batteries, and then lenses. Lenses is the part that we didn't talk about. Lens selection wise, just a couple of lenses: 35mm f1.8, 18mm f1.8, Sigma 24 to 72.8. Those are the three lenses that I travel with these cameras. That gives me all the coverage I need for some good landscape work, some good open gate video recording options. So if I want to know that I want to shoot in 6K open gate, I can shoot at 18mm and then reframe for 4K or 1080. So I've got one lens that's doing multiple different field of view coverages depending on my output. I've got a 24 to 72.8 because let's face it, that's just a workhorse lens, and I like the Sigma one. I like ours, but mine is down and out for repair because I dropped it. Yes, even we drop and break our own equipment sometimes too. And knowing that I'm not giving anything up between using the Sigma 24-70 or using our 24-70 is just an awesome choice. Well, yes, ours has focus breathing and the not rectilinear, the manual power focal functionality with it, and it's a design look between the colors and stuff. Knowing that I'm not giving anything up on focusing by going with the Sigma lenses is a huge option as well with the L mount. So that is, I know I had said I wanted to talk about, bringing my camera on, what I traveled with, what I create with. So hopefully that was helpful for some. I know that that's maybe not relevant to everybody. I know in some cases it's just me rambling about camera equipment and how I do things, but how you do things may be different. But just know that if you've got no experience in video, the X is going to be an amazing camera for you to be able to get going if you know that you want to be able to have the top of the line features. If you're just getting into video and you know that you're never going to use ProRes, stuff like that, go for a Mark II. Because the main difference between the two cameras here is how serious or how in-depth of a video shooter you plan on being. If you are diehard, you know you need things like ProRes, you want the highest possible image quality, you know you're going to be shooting RAW 100%, go with an S5 Mark IIX. If you don't know about RAW, if you know that you're never going to need all intra codecs, you don't care about the ProRes options, go with an S5 Mark II. That MSRP $200 SFU2 unlock will get you RAW over HDMI, which basically gives you some of the highest quality image that you can get out of a camera. You've got that available if you need it on the Mark II. Or if you're like me and you just like a totally slicked out black design and you want to draw as little attention to yourself with the camera, go with the S5 Mark IIX. You're never really going to be wrong with either of them. Now that Live View Composite's been added to the Mark II, they have the high resolution shot mode. You've got all the Wi-Fi connectivity between the two cameras for things like sending to your mobile device and controlling. If you know that you need to do live streaming, the X is the camera to go to, but you've got a really solid platform and you've got a huge lens selection to go with because, again, the L-mount Alliance, Leica, Sigma, and Panasonic, they're all first-party lenses. I don't know how many times I see in the chat people saying, or not in the chat, in comments out there saying that there's no lenses for the L-mount. Well, if you are claiming there are no lenses for the L-mount, you're blind. The L-mount Alliance is one of the largest lens selections available for a lens mount on a camera. And the biggest thing is that they are all first party. This is not like it used to be years ago where this lens was made and you have to give up focusing speed or you have to give up this or that or maybe it'll work and you have to go check with a million other people as to whether or not it works. That doesn't exist on the L-mount. The L-mount Alliance is designed where all of the lenses, all of the communication is done so that you take a Sigma lens, put it on an S5 Mark II, it communicates, it's first party. All the information is there. You take our lens, you put it on a Sigma body, all the information's there. On a Leica body, all the information's there. It is a unified, set of communication parameters. So don't feel that you have to, be concerned about whether or not you've got lenses available for it. You've got every optic under the sun in almost every focal length that you can think of is available, almost. Make sure that you all heard me say almost. And it just makes a solid platform if you're someone looking to get a good, competent, high-quality travel camera, or be able to rig it up and have something that rivals some of the $10,000+, $20,000+ cinema cameras out there. One of our cameras can do that, especially with, being in the hands of someone who's creative, who has a vision, who has a plan that you want to do with it. These cameras will do what you tell them to do, and they'll do it in a pretty damn good fashion. So 3 more questions come in here, or comments come in here, and then I am going to call it at 2:30 my time, because I do have another meeting to go to today. In AFC mode, is AFC mode supposed to work continuously in photo modes? I only see it working in movie modes, trying to use the S5 Mark II to feed an ATEM video switcher via HDMI. Yes, it does work in photo mode. What you may have to double check here is in the menu here, if you go into the gear menu, and this is for Mr. Meisel, I think, you're going to go into, where is it? I think it's up here. First or second page. I have to remember exactly where it is, because I change it once when I get the camera, and then I never go back in and touch it again. We're going to go into AF. It might actually be under the photo settings here. It's detection. Detection. How am I missing this? Okay, maybe it's just under the video page here. Yes, so in video, you'll see continuous AF, mode 1 and mode 2. Mode 1 is set where it will only run the autofocus while video is recording. Mode 2 is it will run all the time. Now, if you are out over HDMI and you're in the photo mode continuous autofocus only activates when you're half pressing the shutter because it's photo mode. It's not designed to continuously be running like video does. So if you are in photo and you have to show continuous autofocus, you have to have either the shutter half pressed or the rear AF button pressed to be able to have continuous autofocus. In video mode, it's going to just continuously move because it depends on what you have continuous AF in the menu setup here, is whether you got mode 1 or mode 2. So hopefully that helps. If you're feeding the S5iix to an ATEM, which I am here, make sure you're in video mode. Go to mode 2 if you want it to run while you're just letting the camera, you're not recording video. That will let it run continuously. Zizo, are we going to see updated zoom lenses for the S series? There is at least one coming. As far as details go, I don't have and can't divulge any information. But there is at least one zoom lens coming. The lens mount is being continuously evolved on. So, yeah, take a look. Keep following us. We'll share information when we're ready. Jeffrey, probably a repeat, but will the S5 II get SSD support? No, it will not. You have to go to an S5iix to get SSD support. We've said it from day one. The S5 Mark II is not getting SSD support. Noah, is the USB-C port on the S5iix a PD, or is it like the S5 and only really for charging when it comes to power? S5 Mark II and Mark IIX are full-blown USB PD power supports. So what that means is that as long as your charging source outputs 9 volt 3 amp, you will power and charge the battery in camera simultaneously. You do have to have a battery in the camera, but that will let you run uninterrupted power over USB-C, which is how I've actually got my Mark II connected right now for the entire stream. Sam, any tips for fixing lens distortion in post if I shoot ProRes RAW? Yeah, most software out there, if you're using any kind of RAW editing software for video, you have to do lens distortion correction if you would like to. That is not something that is brought in with the RAW signal because lens distortion correction is a software-based correction. Not always. Some lenses are permanently or like optically corrected for as little distortion. Modern lenses from all camera brands are using some level of software for it. But yeah, if you want to correct ProRes RAW or Blackmagic RAW for lens correction, things like Resolve, Premiere, all those different programs usually have the ability to go in and do lens correction for you. Intrigal, a true macro 1:1 lens would be nice. Well, it does exist. The 105mm macro Sigma, it's a 1:1 macro, does exist. And I love this lens. Is there another way to lock to AF lock on the S5 II since the buttons are no longer there? Yeah, you just have to program. You can program that combination for AF AE lock to whatever you want. When working with various different photographers and videographers, some stuff like that you'll see changes over time with cameras, because the bulk of the feedback you end up getting from everybody tends to be like, hey, this button really should be AF on. And that's what happened on the Mark II and the Mark IIX. The vast majority of people that we were working with while we were in the development phase of the camera all came back and said, AE AF lock is cool, but that's not the primary that would make the most sense under that, like on a button that's going to be right under your thumb. But the nice thing is you can go in there and reprogram that. If you're not someone who needs AF or AF on, if you only want it to be AE or AF lock, just go into the camera menu system. If I go in here, you're just going to go into the camera settings. You're going to go into the FN button assignment, which I can remember where that is. No, thank you. That's going to be here. You're going to go to FN button set in rec mode. Come down and you'll see that AF on button. I can come in here and I can change this to AF lock, AE lock if I needed to. Let's see here. Sacred City says, I love lamp. So do I do. So do I. Just one time, say it for the record. Lumix is love. Lumix is life. Well, I mean, Lumix is definitely an amazing brand. It's why I love working for the company that I do and with the people I do. I would never say any camera company or anything outside of the people that you love with you is life. But, you know, hey. In future updates, will there be 1.6 anamorphic support for full frame Sur lenses? How about false color? The anamorphic desqueeze expansion is something that Matt Fraser has definitely been, working with our team on to see what we can do, what we can add and move forward. At this point, I don't know. As anyone that's shot with anamorphic lenses, you know that our system is one of the only, if not the only, current mirrorless camera that supports desqueeze as well as the stabilization corrections needed for anamorphic lenses. If we start looking at the various different desqueeze ratios that have been coming out, each one of those has to be mapped basically on the system. So the stabilization has to be modified to accommodate that desqueeze. In some cases, stuff just takes a bit of time to kind of work its way into the system. It also depends on where the priority is for that versus some of the other things that we're working on. But keep asking. Know that there's support from, at least here in the US team, there's support for that as well. And false color is a very different thing too. I don't know if we would do false color in camera, because a couple different versions of it and different scales to work with. But it is something that we have brought up and we do talk with our engineers about as well. Not sure if you mentioned already, any new non-paywall firmware updates for the autofocus on the S models. So for one, I wouldn't classify it as paywall. I actually have a bit of an issue with that term. If you've been in the video and photo industry long enough, you know that some features like RAW are commonly, because of their not mass market appeal, they are a separated product from it. But I just hate the term paywall. But as far as autofocus for the S models, every time we do a firmware update, know that there's always typically something in there that's refining, that's tweaking things, that's taking feedback from everybody. It's not always explicitly, kind of shouted in the firmware release notes. Sometimes it's just as simple as system stability with firmware for things like AF and just general stuff like that. So, yeah, anything explicit, I don't really have any updates as far as anything explicitly there for it. So, but yeah. SHGR1 tripod grip. Can that little adapter that comes with it be purchased separately? Lost mine. I'd have to check. I don't know if that piece is purchasable separately. I will take a look for that one. If you reach out to me, either email or shoot me a message over on Reddit, I'll try to see if I can come up with that. A lot of my team is out this week right now, so I don't have immediate access to that kind of information, but I will try to take a look and see if I can find that for you. Okay. With that, because I can feel my voice is slowly slipping away, thank you all so much for tuning back in and having an awesome showing of viewership live this week. I miss doing these things live. The recorded stuff is fun because I can be maybe a little more organized with my thoughts, but I think it loses a bit of the special sauce that we've all got going here, being able to actually go back and forth and have a conversation. We will be live again next Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. That is the 22nd. Depending on what the weather is like down here in Austin, I might try to do the live stream with the S5 Mark IIX from the field next week. If you've been following, it's like 102 degrees out down here in Austin right now, so it's a little challenging to go out and do that. I've done it before. I really don't want to, get a heat stroke with that. But otherwise, yeah, thank you all so much. If you like the conversation, if you like the video, please like the video. Actually, click the like button down the bottom. If you want to know when more of these streams are coming up and you don't already, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon. Probably the biggest thing that helps us is if you have recommendations or questions that you didn't get answered on the stream, drop a comment in this video after it gets posted. Comments help the algorithm, help us get more visibility, get more people to join us. The more people that join the streams, the more things I can do with it, the more visibility we get, which just means the cooler things we can do in the future. Outside of that, y'all, thank you so much. I'm going to go nurse my voice, make sure that I don't lose it completely. And yeah, we'll be back next Thursday, 2 p.m. Eastern Time, right here on Lumix Live. Thank you all. Have an awesome weekend, and go create some cool stuff. Later.